All right. So I figured I'd film sort of a honest recap of how this season went. And considering nobody watches these videos yet, it's a lot easier to do that. So, a pretty brutal season, to be completely honest. Started out with some college tournaments, fished a few regionals, so a lot of local tournaments and stuff like that. Probably won't talk about all the local tournaments just because there's so many of them. And then a few more college tournaments to wrap out the season. So I'll just kind of start with how the first college tournament of the year went at Lake Okeechobee. I historically have not done very well in Florida. I had one good tournament there. I qualified for a natty a few years ago on Harris Chain, and then since then I've struggled. So the first one was on Okeechobee. That tournament ended up finishing 219th, which is pretty terrible. I don't even think we didn't have the limit either day, and it was not the best performance on my part in terms of how I went about practice and everything during the tournament. Some lessons from that one. We pulled a few all-nighters in practice for that tournament just because we tried to do too many things in conjunction with fishing that tournament. And you need to focus. We need to focus is one of the takeaways from that on just the fishing part of it. And the other lesson to take from that is understanding when to pivot, practice, and then when to pick an area and slow down in the tournament. So almost to the opposite. Tried to pivot too much during the tournament, didn't pivot enough in practice, and bombed that one completely. So a little bit after that, we had another regional on Pickwick, Bass Nation Regional, trying to qualify for that national championship. I ended up 104th place, another terrible tournament. I thought I had a pretty good practice for that one. I had some fish found that were minnow fish, kind of schools that were roaming around out of the current. And I just didn't understand the lake at all during that time of year, and I spent most of my time fishing in areas that were gonna be good probably a couple weeks later, and it ended up not being good during the time that the tournament was at. So lesson from that one, I just learned a lot about the TVA and how the fish set up out there and all that stuff. I'm still struggling with the TVA, honestly. That place has really been a problem for me. I've never had a good tournament on the TVA yet, so that's something that I'm very motivated to work on fixing. It really pisses me off. But after that, had another bad tournament. Went to Bugs Island for another one of the college bass series. Ended up 139th. I thought the weights for that tournament were going to be a lot lower than they were. And I found some fry garters, some spawners on some stumps and stuff like that with live scope. And they were like 2-pounders. It just was not enough. And a lot of other teams, I guess, found some of those fish that were set up a little bit deeper, or had more stumps that they ran that had better quality fish on them. I didn't run enough areas. I kind of hunkered down in a couple areas and picked it apart, and it was not the deal for that one. So another tough tournament there. Some of the takeaways that I had from that one was just doing the basics right, just in terms of how I break down water and how I approach each spot, and then again pivoting more in practice to try to figure out some of those other ways to catch fish like floaters and stuff like that. I was too far back, I think, in terms of the fish progression on where they were. I should have tried to fish more about where they were heading to versus where they had been, because a lot of the stuff I was fishing was going away anyways. Then I rolled back to Iowa City, hopped in the Okoboji Open. There's about 80-something boats in that one, usually 80 to 100. Had a decent tournament there, ended up 14th, so that was nice to have some success. Did not figure out how to scope them in that tournament. I wish I would have. There's some things that I learned from that tournament I think that I'm going to apply in the future on bodies of water that set up similarly to that one, but I ended up just throwing a swim jig the whole time, caught 17-something pounds, and We ended up 14th, which was pretty solid. So I was supposed to fish another college tournament after that on Chickamauga, and my boat broke down, and I was getting it fixed, and was still planning on fishing that tournament, but then my truck broke down. So I ended up not fishing that tournament. I scratched that one because we needed to fix the boat truck. So that meant that my next tournament would have been the regional on Lake Erie. I had this tournament circled for a long time on the calendar. I was really adamant that I was going to qualify for the nationals in this tournament, which is the mindset you have to have. And this was a tournament, again, where it was just an emphasis on doing the basic things right. And I did not do the basic things right, and I made a gamble in my game plan that was not the right decision. Hindsight's 2020. All throughout practice, I was looking at the weather for that tournament, sort of trying to decide what I wanted to do. So for that tournament, you could fish on Lake Erie, or you could fish the river, Detroit River, or you could run all the way over to St. Clair. So the biggest fish, or the biggest bags are going to come from St. Clair. It was fishing better, and yeah, it was obvious that was going to be the deal. Anchor Bay, St. Clair, all that. But the weather was looking like it was going to be really nasty for the last 2 days of the tournament, and it turns out even the second half of the first day of the tournament. So I knew that a lot of people that went to St. Clair were taking a massive gamble on getting there and back and catching a big bag for 2-3 days of competition, and I just didn't think it was feasible for most of the field. And same thing with way out in the bay on Erie, also not feasible in my opinion. You'd have to get really lucky or be really experienced on that place to know that you're going to catch what you need out there in the time that we had. So I planned to meet in the middle, so I spent most of my practice in that Detroit River area, breaking it down, and I was pretty confident I could catch about 17 pounds a day, and then I would slowly, first day I probably wouldn't be where I needed to be, but then the second day I would get into the qualifying cut, and then the third day I would make more moves because the weather was going to get worse and worse. So first day rolls around, I got my game plan, and I roll out there, and for some reason all of preparation for this tournament I was really focused on spare prop and hub and stuff like that, and the fact that I didn't have a backup hub, which was stupid. I had never had anything like that happen, and I was not worried about hitting something out there. But I sent it first day, and I left my spare prop in the back of my truck. I never put it in my boat, which was dumb, because I didn't have a lot of room in the boat. So I'm running to my spot on day one, skipping waves in the 18-foot Ranger, and throw an ear on my prop. I didn't hit anything, I just threw one of the ears on my prop. So now I'm in an interesting situation where I'm pretty far away from the ramp, and I need a new prop for my truck. So I called the tournament director, ended up Ubering back to get my prop and then restarting. So I lost like 2 hours right away and scrambled after that, caught 13 something pounds. I had to give myself like 2.5 hours to run back because of how bad the weather was. I needed all of it just from the river back to Monroe. It was that bad. And I managed to catch a limit in that 45 minutes, and I didn't call very much after that. So I'm sitting 81st after that first day, and it's looking like I'm going to need about 20 pounds if I'm going to make the cut to qualify for nationals or have a chance to fish on day 3, which is completely doable. Where I'm looking around at, I had in that 13-pound bag, I had like a 4-pounder, and I had a 3-pounder, and another 3-pounder, and then I had 2 absolute rats. So I was not as far away from having what I needed as I thought I was. So I'm pretty hopeful about this. I'm like, okay, I can catch 20, 21 pounds off this stuff if I actually, have all day to fish it. And I'm smart with my rotation and all that, because the fish are there. I mean, there's big fish in the river, and I knew where they were, at least in the areas that I was fishing. But they canceled the next 2 days of tournament, so I didn't factor in the fact that Bassmaster might just cancel the 2 days of tournament and it would end up being a one-day shootout, which I should have, considering what they did in the opens. So I ended up 81st in that tournament, no opportunity to kind of move up the leaderboard. I've had a decent amount of experience running rough water with my boat, and I felt pretty comfortable doing it. So I was kind of also banking on that advantage of having the confidence to run that stuff and running the troughs and knowing how to do that, even though, the boat's not that long. But ended up not being able to exercise that advantage. So a lesson from that one in the future, I guess, I know is, first off, just do the basics right. Backup equipment's not helpful if it's not in your boat. Like if you don't have your spare prop, you don't have a spare hub, you don't have the stuff you need to install it. You don't have a backup graph, you don't have your backup live scope producer, you don't have your backup whatever in the boat, and it's useless. So the basics there. I also lost a big one on that first day that probably could have given me an extra 2 pounds. So another thing of that was just, the basics, good hooks, use the right action rod for the technique that you're doing. Stay focused the whole time. Like I was using cheaper minnow heads. Like I needed minnow heads with better hooks, and I thought it was a drum, so I was kind of horsing them in a little bit too. So I'd caught like 3 drum in a row, and then I caught, then the next one was a 4-pound smallmouth, and then it was the drum from then on out. It's the weirdest thing. But, you've always got to be prepared for it to be a bass. So just do the basics, keep your head in the game, have your backup equipment ready, expect the unexpected, especially when you're on a place like Erie. So that tournament was just a complete failure of the basics. So that was a good lesson to learn there. And also, if it's looking like it's going to be potentially even a one-day shootout, you might want to make that gamble on day one and get yourself where you need to be. And then if they end up sending it, days 2 and 3, you can sort of figure it out from there. But it's better to be in position day one than to be out of it day one. So that is some of the lessons that I learned from that one. So then after that tournament, I believe my next significant tournament, I fished a couple local ones. We got second in one and won some money in some local tournaments and stuff like that. But I think after that, the next important one was the Iowa Bass Nation 10K. It was important to me, and I finished middle of the pack in that one. I usually bomb that tournament for whatever reason. On the river that time of year, it's like late summer. I always try to force my style onto the river, so I try to force the sit in an area, finesse fish kind of deal out there, and it's just, you got to be adaptable. And this year we finished above middle of the pack, which is actually my best finish in that tournament ever. Still not happy with it because we didn't win, but I felt pretty proud of the improvement, at least in terms of we're going in the right direction. We'll win it next year, but had to stop 13-something pounds on the river that time of year. And, it was really one bite away from getting a check, but you got to put yourself in position to get that bite. And I just did not put myself in position to do that. So after the 10K, I think it looks like I had a gap. I fished a bunch of local stuff, did all right on the river in a few tournaments, won some money. And then I had a couple weeks ago, I had a Pickwick tournament for MLF college tournament, Pickwick. And it says on paper that I zeroed in that tournament. I had 4, and I didn't weigh them in, which is honestly, it's not what I would normally do. So I have a, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know, I have like a code. I always weigh them in, and I broke the code for that one, which kind of shows our headspace there. But Pickwick kind of has my number right now, so I'm hoping I get to hop in some tournaments there next year because I really need to right that ship. It seems like there's certain lakes that I don't know if anybody's watching this video, you can tell me, but it seems like there's lakes that just become your nemesis almost. And I've had a few of those lakes over the past years. Okoboji used to be that for me. I finished dead last in every tournament I fished out there, and then I was fortunate enough to win a state tournament out there last year and did well in the Okoboji Open, and I had some success out there since then. And I've cashed a few checks out there. I won $1,200 out there a couple years ago. So, just this continuing to fish that place and knowing people out there that teach me some things and all that stuff just adds up over time, and eventually you win. So I'm hoping to do that. I'm going to do that with Pickwick. It's really frustrating me so far. Same thing with all the other TVA lakes. But yeah, didn't weigh anything in that tournament. That was a tournament where I had a good practice for that tournament. I might put some pictures in here. Most of the field, especially the people that did well, did not have a good practice for that tournament. And that just tells me I didn't pivot. And I know I didn't pivot. I had some current swing fish and stuff like that found, and they didn't run any current. And I stuck with it, and I realized that they were holding to individual, pieces of cover, and the bait wasn't in the areas that I was fishing. And I didn't adjust. I didn't fish any isolated cover. I didn't fish, I didn't move around until I found the bait. I just went to the areas that I caught them in practice and drifted around and scoped. And then at the end of the day, I panicked and I went up shallow and caught a bunch of fish. And then, because I found an area that looks just like Iowa, and ended up catching some shallow fish up there, which was, the only positive thing about that event, other than the lessons that I have learned and get to take forward. That one was rough. Definitely learned that you need to approach these lakes, especially the ones that you haven't been to, by paying very close attention. So I didn't pay enough attention on the day of the tournament to what the weather was doing. We had wind that was gassing, so that could have set them up in areas that I didn't fish. A lot shallower on some of those bars, stuff like that. And I needed to just think about it and adjust, and not just beat the dead horse of what I had been doing. Just trust your gut. My gut was telling me to do something else, and I just ignored it in that tournament. So learned a good lesson there. There's a bunch of other lessons that I wrote down, and specific baits and stuff like that, and ways to approach certain fish down there, because the fish are a lot more pressured. So the same things that you do in Iowa might not be the best approach down there, where they've seen 100 baits, or they see bait every single day or something like that. You got to change the way you approach it. So after that tournament, I think it was last week, fished Iowa Bass Nation, College, State, and was in second after day one, ended up third. That was rough, because we had it within our reach, obviously. Just prayed to God for an opportunity after that first day, because the plan fell apart. And then I didn't adjust correctly on day two. I knew what I needed to do. I just thought it was going to take more weight for some reason. And as soon as I got to my spot and I felt how cold and those clouds parted, and it was clearly just going to be still high skies, frontal conditions, I knew it wasn't going to get any better. And I should have just gone with my other plan to catch another 12 pounds. But I kept hunting for that magical 17 that I always assume is there, but it wasn't there doing what I wanted them to do. I would have had to do something completely different, and I didn't adjust, wasted too much time in that tournament, didn't have time to lock back down, and honestly wasted that opportunity. But it was another good learning experience, so it wasn't a waste. But overall, if you look at this season, this is going to be a long video, but nobody watches them anyway, so this is more just for me to kind of come back to in the future and remember. Overall, this season, I would say it looks terrible on paper, and this was my last college season, so college career is kind of it looks really bad. It looks like a bust, it really does. It looks like I suck on paper, and this is all I do. I don't do anything else but fish, really. So it temporarily sucks to have it, just look like, you pour your life into something and then it ends up looking as though you're a beginner or whatever like that. But I understand why I lost when I lost, and we're gonna see. I'm calling it. We're gonna see some changes in this next year, 2 year, 3 year period where it's, we're going in the right direction here, especially locally. But I mean, just in general, going in the right direction. Just refocusing it on the basics. I know how to catch fish. I promise I'm a good fisherman. We're moving forward here. If you can, I'm pretty confident that if I can handle a season like this and learn what I need to learn from every single tournament, it's going to make me a lot better down the line. So, really looking forward to this next season. Honestly, at this point, really have nothing to lose. So it's a good mindset to have. Just stay completely focused and dialed in on these events and bring my best game forward. Take what I've learned from college. The whole point of fishing in college for me was just to get this experience that I got around the country and just see how these fish react and what this tournament's like, what the travel's like, and all that stuff. So, it looks bad on paper, but it's going to make a great story down the line when I can say that I went from one of the, pretty horrible college career to, the pro level fishing ability. It's going to be a better story, and wouldn't have it any other way, honestly. I love the adversity. I love the challenge. I love the story that it's creating, and, I love God, and I know that He has a plan for what I'm doing, and I know that the product of the hard work, I know what the product is, and it's not showing yet, but it's going to show, and I'm going to start hopefully documenting more of that on here. But I'm spending a lot of time off camera working, so yeah, looking forward to it. Nobody's going to watch this, but if you guys do see this, yeah, hopefully it helps somewhat paint a picture of what's been going on and what it's like to really go for something. So yeah, appreciate it.